Okay, well, I'm really excited to be here today. I actually have I have a very strong place in my heart for Endeavor. Endeavor to me is a lot of what Marcel was just talking about in terms of giving back. It was started by a friend of mine named Linda Rotenberg, who I went to college with, and she envisioned it as a way to kickstart entrepreneurship in other countries, and I think Brazil has obviously taken that to heart. And Endeavor is incredible. It's just an incredible organization all over the world, but particularly in Brazil. And the success that Endeavor has had here in creating companies has allowed those entrepreneurs then to give back and to put back into Endeavor and to help new companies. And that was always Linda's vision. And I think it's just incredible. And one of my good friends, another one, is a guy named Wences Casares, who is Argentinian, although he built one of his most successful companies here in Brazil, and he did it with Endeavor's help. And he really, he credits everything sort of to getting started with his presentation to Endeavor. So I'm really excited to be here, and hope to help you understand how we think about things in Silicon Valley. What does that mean for us in terms of our mindset and culture, and how can you take that here? And I'll tell you a little bit about my personal story as an entrepreneur, and also about the SurveyMonkey story, because I'm unfortunately not the founder of SurveyMonkey, but I'll tell you about the founder of SurveyMonkey, how he started. I think they're both fairly instructional. His was a better story than mine in some ways. So I think, clearly Silicon Valley is a place, and it is this. Actually, for those of you that haven't been there, and probably most of you, it's not as exciting, dynamic a physical place as one would imagine. It's actually kind of sleepy, suburban. It's pretty, but it's not Sao Paulo, it's not Rio, it's not New York. It's kind of quiet, and not a lot of high-rise buildings, and there's not a whole lot to do at night. But it is a place with a lot of dynamism. There is this ecosystem that Marcelo talked about. There is a lot of things going on in that physical location. But it's more than a place. It's a state of mind. It is a culture. It exists outside that physical location. That physical location is the biggest manifestation of that culture, and so people get them confused. But you can be part of Silicon Valley and live anywhere. And in fact, one of the things that has happened over the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years is that it has sort of propagated out from its physical location. There's still a greater concentration of that ecosystem in that physical place, within a 30-mile radius. But it has spread, and there are people doing what looks like a lot of Silicon Valley all over the world. And I think that's a great thing. And I think, part of our job of people who live there is to help kind of take it out of that physical location and bring it to other places. So it's really, if you think about it, it's really a culture. It's a culture of innovation. It's a culture of entrepreneurship. And there's a couple really important things in that culture. It's first and foremost, it's a culture where startups are raised up on a pedestal and exalted, where the entrepreneur is the person that people look up to. And that is different. And it's not just different, it has, like I said, sort of these pockets, but in most of the United States, that's not always the case. Big companies, people aspire to work and be at big companies. And so to the degree that people start to exalt the entrepreneur and to put them up on a pedestal, that is sort of that Silicon Valley culture pervading. Part of that, and there's a couple sort of things here that are really important to make this culture work. So I think the first and the most important point is that it's okay to fail. It's not only okay to fail, it's likely you're going to fail. And that people understand in that mindset that most entrepreneurs will fail. Some will fail repeatedly before they get it to work. Some may never get it to work. But your failure is not held against you in this Silicon Valley culture. If anything, someone who's failed is much more valuable than someone who's never tried, by far. I'd much rather, invest in somebody or hire somebody or work with somebody who has had a failed startup than someone who's never tried at all. Because they know what it's like. They know how hard it is. They know all the things you have to go through. And even though they failed, they've got a tremendous amount of experience and scar tissue and things that will help them as they move forward. So failure is not a bad thing. And people learn from failure. Some of the most successful entrepreneurs that you think of, oh my gosh, these guys are amazing, they failed. Sometimes the first time, sometimes the second time. Sometimes, Mark Pincus, who runs Zynga, I think Mark's had 4 or 5 failed startups before he really got to Zynga. So and no one held that against Mark. No one said, oh, we're not going to give you money because you failed. Instead, they said, oh, okay, I get why you failed last time. All right, but you're a tried and true entrepreneur. Let's give it another shot. So that's really important. Secondly, and I think this is clearly something people worry about here, that you need funding to be available. Funding doesn't have to come from Silicon Valley, but if you want to create a Silicon Valley culture outside of that physical location, funding is really important. Now, not every company needs funding, and I'll talk about SurveyMonkey as the kind of antithesis to that because it didn't raise any funding ever. But most companies need some funding to get started. And as someone asked in the question, the hardest money to get is that seed or angel funding. In a place like Brazil, where you have high interest rates, it is definitely harder to get that. And you also have less of a track record where people have made a lot of money. When you see a company like Instagram with 12 people get bought for $1 billion after 18 months, that sort of creates a lot of people wanting to invest in those things, hoping to hit that lottery ticket. But it's when you have the interest rates being high, it's easier for people to park their money in a bank account a lot of times than to invest in a startup. I can't solve the interest rate problem in Brazil. But what I can say is what Endeavor stands for is exactly what will help solve the problem. Creating successful companies here, having those companies create liquidity for their investors and their employees, having those people who've created those companies then turn around and give back and invest in new startups. That's what it takes, because it's not just the money that those angel investors provide. They provide tremendous advice and expertise. And so it is better to take less money from people who can help you than to take more money from people who can't. And so I think Brazil is starting to get there. There's some great companies here. Certainly, I know the internet space, so I can't speak to all of the great companies that have been built. But Mercado Libre, obviously very successful, been around for quite some time, public company. But I think there's a new wave of companies like Netshoes and Buscapé and Catho and lots of companies that are going to do incredibly well here. And those entrepreneurs and their teams will be incredibly valuable as funders. And so those are the people who will give money despite the fact that they might make more money putting it in the bank account, because they will feel the need to give back. And they will feel the need. I do angel investing. I don't look at it as a way for me to make a lot of money. In fact, I hope I break even. That's kind of my goal. But I look at it as people helped me, and I need to turn around and do the same for the next generation of people. And I think that's the way entrepreneurs think. They think about helping people. And if you've been successful, I think it is incumbent upon you to help other people. And so I think that's where funding should come from. And I think that's what's happening all around the world, not just in Silicon Valley. And lastly, the support mechanisms, you got to have those things. One of the things we really do have in Silicon Valley, the location, is we have all the support networks. And these are resources that we need. These are lawyers and accountants and PR firms and recruiters. And those things take time to build. You need scale. But and those service providers are incredibly knowledgeable because they've seen lots of companies come through. And they can be incredibly helpful. So investors are part of it, but the support mechanism is just as important. And so helping to get those things built outside of the physical location of Silicon Valley can help bring the culture of Silicon Valley to you. And of course, a mindset that anyone can do it. We don't discriminate in the US, in Silicon Valley on, someone's got a great idea, a great passion, and they go and do something, and it doesn't matter who they are or where they came from. I would say they don't even matter where in the world they came from, except that sometimes we have crazy immigration policies in the United States that make it difficult for us. But we do work through those too. We bring a lot of companies to Silicon Valley, and more you'll see people from Silicon Valley investing in Brazil and other countries. I'll tell you a little bit about my story. So 20 years ago, it was a lot different. It probably looks a lot like Brazil does now, maybe even a little bit worse. I worked at Capitol Records, which is part of EMI Music, and I had this idea that this is, and again, I'm old, so I apologize, 1994. Well, they had the idea in 93, but in 1994, I started a company with my best friend from high school. I was 26, and we had this idea that the computer was going to be a better way for people to learn about and discover new music. That radio and MTV were the primary ways, but that there was less and less new music getting played on those for a variety of reasons, and that the computer was going to allow people to listen to the music they wanted to hear without having to hear things that they didn't want to hear. That control over your music experience was really vital and different. And that we could put advertising around that experience just like radio and television, and we could make a media business. So it was called Launch Media. We started actually with CD-ROMs that came out every month, kind of like a magazine, but the experience was more like a game that came out every month. It was sort of a broadband on a disc, or MTV you could control. And we had interviews with bands and live performances and music reviews where you could listen to the music and watch the videos. And we had ads. We had TV ads that ran in this immersive experience. And I thought it was a brilliant idea. Almost no one else did. And now in retrospect, it seems like, okay, well, all this stuff was going to happen. But at the time, I'd never done anything like this. I can't write code. My partner, my friend from high school, he couldn't either. We had to raise $100,000 just to build a to hire some developers to build a prototype of what we wanted. And so we raised that from our friends and family, because those are the only people who are going to give you money on a business plan, which is all we had. We didn't know anybody who'd ever raised angel money or venture capital. We didn't know any venture capitalists. And so we raised the $100,000, told them all they were going to lose the money. After they agreed to give it to us, then we told them all, you'll never see it again. Which was a good bet. It turned out to be incorrect, but it was a good bet. And I think there is a lot of truth to that. That, people who do very early stage investing, your friends and family, those are the last people whose money you want to lose, but they're the people whose money you're most likely to lose. So we raised that money. We built a prototype, and from there we were able to kind of convince people eventually to give us money, but it was very hard. We got a lot of doors slammed in our face. We had some of the smartest venture capitalists in the world turn us down repeatedly. And they weren't wrong. They were wrong about us specifically, but they weren't wrong about some of the comments they made about what we were doing in retrospect. But I didn't know. You don't know these things till you go through it. But we did have people tell us that no one will ever want to listen to music on a computer. No one will ever accept any advertising on a computer. There was no internet back then in the way we think of it. There was no banner ads. A banner ad hadn't been created. We had one guy who's a very successful venture capitalist who said, "I get it," and we were about to jump for joy in the meeting until he said, "But you guys will never pull this off. Rolling Stone and MTV will beat you to it, and they'll kill you." So I guess what I would say, in learning about this is, it's very important to get a lot of feedback from a lot of people. SurveyMonkey is all about feedback. I'll walk you through the SurveyMonkey story in a minute, but. If everybody tells you what you're doing is a great idea, you're probably way too late. If everybody tells you it's a really bad idea, it probably is. And then there's something in the middle that sort of, some people tell you it's a good idea and some people tell you're an idiot. And that's also, that is probably the sweet spot of where you want to be. And you have to filter out a little bit of the people who tell you it's a good thing and people tell you it's a bad thing. I also completely agree with Marcel. Like, you need to talk to lots of people about your ideas because you can't get that feedback until you do. And so holding it in and keeping it secret is the worst thing you can do. You need to. The idea isn't as critical as the execution, and I think that was true in our case. In a lot of ways, we were way too early in what we were doing. And the tools and technology weren't there. And we struggled through, we made it, we got our first product out. The internet kind of started to take off, but you couldn't do music streaming online back then. But we built text stuff on the internet, we continued our CD-ROM, and eventually the relationships we built, the advertisers, the music labels, the artists, turned into something we could then take and turn into products and services online. We were able to build sort of one of the first music video sites online, first internet radio service online. We took the company public in early '99, and I sold it to Yahoo in 2001, and it became Yahoo Music. And I stayed at Yahoo for 6 years running that business, and eventually got to be the largest music site in the world, 60 million unique visitors a month, 5 billion music videos streamed a year, the largest internet radio service. And a very profitable business at Yahoo. But it took me 13 years. So, a long road. And a lot of struggles, a lot of, I'd say in the early days, people like to look back and romanticize, and there was a lot of fun. But there was a lot of really rough moments, when you can't not only pay your own rent, but you can't pay the office rent, and you have to put both of those on your credit card. That's not good. It's just not a good feeling. But it did work out for me, and I feel very fortunate. And people helped a lot along the way, and we sort of we did really help create what is today. Music is a digital experience, and so I feel really good about that, even if. I'm no longer sort of doing this particular thing. We took it a long way. SurveyMonkey is another just amazing story. Very briefly, I'll just, for those who don't know what we do, we help people gather feedback and to make decisions. That's really what it is. Across all different kinds of things, you create your survey. If you're a survey creator, you send it out to people you want to send it to. They respond on our site, and you get data. It's like magic, and incredibly useful. People use it for all different kinds of things, customer feedback, but also employee surveys, planning an event like this, event feedback, all different kinds of use cases, education, nonprofits, government, you name it. People have come up with crazy ways to use this tool that are very useful to them. But let me tell you about the story of SurveyMonkey, because I think this is also particularly helpful to you as you're thinking about your business. So you might think of SurveyMonkey as a classic Silicon Valley company, but it is nothing like a classic Silicon Valley company. It was started by one guy named Ryan Finley, who was a year out of university in Madison, Wisconsin. And he was working at a little software company there. And by the way, Madison is, you know, a long way away from Silicon Valley, both physically and kind of spiritually. He was working at this little software company there, and someone asked him to do a survey of their new product. And so he looked around on the web, didn't see anything he liked, and so he wrote his own code. He wrote his own survey tool. And people at the company started using it. And they said, wow, this is great. We could use this for lots of things. And it's 1999, and everyone was starting companies. You should start a company. So he quit his job and started a company to do survey tool. Now, that part isn't that unusual. But what happened afterwards is very, very different. He started the company, and Ryan didn't know anybody who'd started a company before. And he just decided to try and figure it out himself. Now, he had some people who helped him along the way, but in essence, he built SurveyMonkey himself. He never raised any money. And for the first 5 years, it was literally just him and his brother. And he came up with a bunch of sort of business model innovations that really sort of are the foundation of why the company is successful. Some of these were out of necessity, not out of just innovation from a design. They were out of necessity because he didn't have money. So first of all, he came up with a name. It sounds like a silly name, SurveyMonkey, but it's very memorable, and that proved to be really important. Secondly, he decided to make the product really easy to use. He did that for two reasons. One, he really believed in simplicity and ease of use, and he was a big fan of Steve Jobs way back then. This was long before Steve had come back and fixed Apple. He just believed in the Apple simplicity model. But two, if he made the product more complicated and added more features, which is what his customers were asking for, he got flooded with support emails, which he had to answer. And so the feedback loop for him was negative. Every time he added more features, he got more support emails, which he couldn't handle. He then spent most of his time focusing on making the product easier and easier to use. And the third thing that he did that was really critical was he didn't have any money to do marketing. And there were other competitors out there doing similar products. So we had to make the product market itself. So we have a free and a paid version. But in essence, both of those versions, the more people send out surveys, the more people learn about us. We are a viral or social tool, if you will. And it's very unique. There's not a lot of other examples out there. But the more people use us, the more other people learn about us. And that's how he got new customers. And so he never spent any money on marketing. He didn't have a marketing person. He just focused on making that flywheel work better and better, and more people learned about it. And with that, he built a profitable business. It was really profitable, in the first year. He financed all of his growth just from the profits of the business. Eventually, after about 5 years, it was still just him and his brother. They knew they needed to hire somebody. They picked up kind of on a whim and moved to Portland, Oregon, because it was warmer. And they thought Silicon Valley was too expensive. And they hired a few more people. But about 3.5 years ago, the company was still 12 people. It was a large global business with customers all over the world, incredibly profitable. And at that point, he also knew that he didn't know what to do next. That he knew the business could be a lot bigger, but he didn't know how to do it. And so he owned the whole company. He decided he was going to bring in some help. He sold control of the company to a couple of private equity investors, and that's how I got involved. They asked me to help them take a look at it. I got real excited. I saw this huge opportunity for this great business that was doing incredibly well, yet there was such a small team. There were a lot of things they hadn't done. And so that's how I ended up joining. But Ryan is still very involved. He's still on the board. He still helps us with a lot of what we're doing. And it was a great story of an entrepreneur who built an incredible business and also knew when he wasn't the person to take the next level. Great. Sorry about that. So no one made him step away from the business. No one asked him to hand over the reins to somebody else or sell the business. It was completely his decision. Hopefully he thinks it's a good one. But we've grown a lot since then. We've gone from 14 to 180 employees. And part of the reason I'm here this week is we've hired our first country manager to help us here in Brazil. So Rodolfo Ol, who's back there, and really focused on international expansion is a big part of what we're doing. I talked a lot about some of these things. The freemium business model, I think it is a very interesting business model, not just for SurveyMonkey, but for other people. So most of our customers use us for free. We have 12 million registered users. And then a small portion of those people come and pay, but they only pay because they need the features that are in the paid product. We don't make them pay. We're happy if people keep using it for free. In fact, our free users are doing a great job for us of telling other people about SurveyMonkey. So, we don't discriminate against them. We're very happy if people continue to use us for free. Oftentimes, people will use us for free when then they're in school, and then they'll kind of go into a company and they'll say, "Oh, we should stop using those paper and pencil surveys, and we should use SurveyMonkey." And I used it in school, and I know how to do it. And that's often how we get brought into companies. And we're now the largest in the world, 47 million uniques a month. We get over 30 million completed responses a month for surveys. And we have customers everywhere. Okay. So, and just a little bit about us in Brazil. We have 155,000 users in Brazil, and people use us for lots of different things here. We have Peixe Urbano, which uses us for kind of getting feedback from their customers. And I'm going to butcher the name, so I apologize. Minha Vida, I don't know. They're using it also to sort of test new features on their site. And then kind of more of an internal use, Deloitte in Brazil switched from using paper surveys for their internal training to using SurveyMonkey. This is for feedback on their training courses. So lots of different use cases. We have a long way to go in Brazil. It's one of our largest non-English speaking international markets today. But because the site SurveyMonkey was only in English for a very long time, that viral flow did not happen in the countries where people didn't speak English. And so even though Brazil is large relative to other countries in our markets, it's still smaller than Ireland and New Zealand. So it's bigger than France for us, but smaller than Ireland and New Zealand. So we clearly have a lot of potential here. I think as you're thinking about your businesses, and this is a hard thing to do, I think some of you already have businesses, some of you are starting businesses. You want to think about your business as you've got to build a value proposition and you've got to make it work. And you're very fortunate to be in Brazil, which is a growing, dynamic, large market. And so you can build products and services for Brazil. However, I would say you want to think about how eventually you can build a more international or global business over time. You don't want to probably do it on day one. It's very hard to do. SurveyMonkeys was kind of an accident. But in order to attract sort of more capital, and in order to attract the best people, in order to try and build great long-term sustaining businesses, it will be certainly valuable, not essential, but valuable to think about your business as something that can be taken outside of Brazil. And I think I think clearly, when you live in a smaller market, you have to think that way. I think when you live in a larger market like Brazil, you don't always have to. I don't think it's an absolute requirement, but I think actually it's been a problem for some companies in the U.S. that have only thought about the U.S. market, and then they find they've built a really great business, but someone's copied it elsewhere. Someone has innovated better elsewhere in the world because they didn't think about how that would extend beyond, the borders of their country. So it's just something to think about. It's obviously, we're very fortunate at SurveyMonkey, but I think it's something you should think about as you're building your business. I think Brazil has a lot of the elements of this culture, as I mentioned. I think there's a lot of great companies being built here. And obviously these are some of them. There's lots more, but I think you're sort of at that early wave, of where great companies are being built, and the next generation of companies that come, they're going to come from, some of those people, as I mentioned, being investors, being advisors. Some of them will leave to be founders of their own companies. And they will have this experience with them. And I think that part of what's missing here, in a lot of places, has just been there's just been not enough history and not enough experience. But as people gain experience, those things will get cycled into the ecosystem, and the ecosystem will get built. And I think you're in a really good place now with there's enough companies and enough success that it will sort of breed more investors. The service providers ecosystem will get built, and I think people will understand. Oh wow, some of these guys struggled for a long time, and then they were very successful. And I think that will sort of help a lot of people understand. I think the fact that you're all sitting here means you believe in this as well, so I don't have to tell you too much. But I think it's very exciting. I think we're seeing more investors come down here. You'll see more foreign investors. If Brazilian investors think it's better to keep their money in the bank account, I think you'll see much more of the U.S. investors, where we earn, 0.2% in the bank, come down here. And I've seen there's a bunch of people who've been coming down here. I have 2 more friends coming in a few weeks. I think people get that this is a really exciting, dynamic place. All right, and with that, I will wrap up and I'll take questions. Obrigado.